Okay. Um, just 1 second. Dara, uh, I didn't write down the name, and I think there was someone you wanted to dedicate the class to. So please send it to me in the chat, like really quickly. So I have someone else I'm going to dedicate the class to. But if you want, and if not, you can do it afterwards. Okay, so we're going to, 1 second. So we're going to dedicate this class to two people. One is Adel Bat Moshe David, a friend of Dara's. Actually, my mother's name was Adel. Actually, Adelaide, and in Hebrew, Yehudit. So a direct descendant of Zev Wolf of Kitzitz, who was one of the first Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov in Mezebush, and a good friend of mine from the Moshav, Shmuel ben Shalom, Shlomo, and Miriam. It's his yurtzeit beginning, I believe, this evening. And so we want to dedicate the class to him. His wife still lives on the Moshav, and I know their family for decades. So Adel Bat Moshe David should have an Aliyat in Neshama, and Shmuel ben Shalom, Shlomo, and Miriam should have an Aliyat in Neshama on the schut of our learning tonight. So we're picking up in the first book of Shmuel in the 10th chapter. Just a quick review. My wife, for some people who might know, the dedication is of Shmuel Silver. Some of you might have been even hosted by them for Shabbat. Okay, and Dara says that some people know her as Elaine and not Adel. Anyways, we're starting in the 10th chapter, the 17th verse. We're halfway through the chapter. Just a quick review is this begins the whole story of Shaul and how he became king. And last time we learned how Shaul was looking for donkeys, his father's donkeys, and he comes to the place where Shmuel lived. And God revealed to him that the people had already asked for a king. Shmuel was not ecstatic about it, especially when they asked, we want a king like all the other nations. And so he felt they were exchanging God as king for an earthly king. Nonetheless, God told him that tomorrow, the person that you will anoint as king, he will come to you. And we learned the whole story, very, very fascinating story, how Shmuel gives him all kinds of signs because Shaul just didn't believe that God had chosen him to be king. He was extremely humble. And as we're going to see, that was his great fault, was his over sense of humbleness. Every personality trait has a good side and sometimes not such a good side. Anyways, all of the signs that Shmuel gave to Shaul came true. And the last one, that's where we ended the class, is he said, you'll come upon a band of prophets and they'll be playing music and they will be prophesying and you will join them and you will also begin to prophesy. And we learned, what does that mean exactly? We discussed at length the connection of music and prophecy. But here it meant that they were in an ecstatic state of praising God. That's what is called prophesying here. It's not like a prophecy for all ages, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the 12 minor prophets. but it means that they were prophesying, mean that they were in an ecstatic state in the presence of God, what we call a prophetic experience, not that they were prophets in the sense that they were giving over a universal or an eternal message, but they were in a state of what's called dvekut. That's where we ended. That's where we ended, and we pick up here that Shmuel calls all of the people together, and in a place called Mitzpeh. Mitzpeh is from the word like to see. It must have been on a tall mountain. The same root is Tzvat Harat Sofim Mitzpeh, that you can see seemingly forever. And he brings all of Israel together, and he tells them that God is the true king, but you wanted a king, so you're going to get a king. So he called everyone, and they did a lottery, and they picked the lot of Binyamin, and then the lot of the family of Shaul, and then finally the lottery picked Shaul himself. Now, Shaul, as I said, he was humble almost to a fault. And so he was, I'll use the vernacular, he was freaking out over this whole thing. And so Shmuel is like telling everyone, here's your king, and Shaul's not there. They didn't know where he was. And God revealed to Shmuel, he's hiding with the baggage. He's like he can't believe this is happening to him. He doesn't feel worthy. He doesn't know if he's up to it. And in a sense, it's a good sign. He's not power hungry, like I am the king. He is trying to avoid it at the best that he can. But they went and they brought him, and they proclaimed, Yechia Melech, long live the king. And this begins the whole story of Shaul as the first king of Israel. And then Shmuel told them all the laws and rules of the king in the Parsha of Shoftim, in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. All the laws, or many of the laws of a king, are spelled out. So he tells everyone. And Shaul goes back to his place, but before he does, there's a group of people who say, Shaul, king? You must be kidding me. Like, we don't need a king. We should continue to do what's good in our own eyes. That phrase we ran into in the book of Shoftim over and over again, that there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what they wanted to do. So in a certain sense, it was time to have a king. It's just that the way that people went about it and how they conceived the king, they wanted to be just like all the other nations. That ends chapter 10. Chapter 11 introduces a new story here, and that is the person called Nachash, the snake. Now, obviously, this is pointing out the qualities of this person. He was the leader of the Ammonite peoples, and he was threatening Israel, the north of Israel, and the people of Yavesh Gilad wanted to make some kind of a treaty with him. They were scared. They didn't know what to do. They were willing to make some kind of treaty with him. So they approached him and said, let's make a treaty. What do you want from us? And so he said, I'll make a treaty with you, but the price is all of the men have to have their right eye gouged out. Now, you can imagine how the people took this. And yet, they felt very isolated. We have to remember, this is 3,000 years ago. There's not mass communication. Even though Israel's a relatively small place, but still, in those days with transportation and communication, people felt quite isolated. So they said, give us a week to think about it. So they send a message as quickly as they could to the other tribes. Shaul, this is very interesting, he's king now. But what did he do? He went back to his place and he's working his fields. He didn't go like to a palace and living the rich life. He went back to his fields. So he's in his fields, and people come and tell him the news that one of the tribes is being threatened, that Nachash, the snake, like in the Garden of Eden, is going to come, and he wants to gouge out their right eyes. So Shaul was very upset. And some say, what's the juxtaposition here? Because remember, we ended the last chapter, there was a group of people who said, Shaul is king. We don't need a king. We don't need Shaul. We'll just continue to do what we want to do. So some of the commentaries say that these men were from this place that is now being threatened. That's why the stories are right next to each other. That's one opinion. So Shaul, and another opinion is that God in a certain way arranged that this enemy would come against Israel right then, right when Shaul is beginning his kingship, in order to give Shaul a chance to prove himself. We're just finishing Purim. It's still Shushan Purim here. It's where you are also. It's Shushan Purim. And the whole story of Purim is that God is behind the scenes arranging everything. The people couldn't see it until everything fell into place, until they were saved from Haman's evil decree. And then it became clear to them. It was so clear to them, it says that they received the Torah in a way that they hadn't even received it at Mount Sinai. That's how clear it was to them that God had saved them. And so some say here that that's why these stories are juxtaposed, is that this is going to give Shaul a chance to prove himself. So what does he do? He takes a yoke of an ox, and he cuts it up, and he sends pieces to representatives of the various tribes, and says, anyone who doesn't join me to protect the people of Yavesh Gilad, this is what's going to happen to your oxen. Now, what's interesting here is Shaul is from Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. For those who have been following or know your Bible, so remember the whole story was called the Pelegish of Givah, which was in Benjamin. There was a civil war because a woman had been gang raped, and so her husband cut up her body in 12 pieces and sent them or 11 pieces, and sent them to all the other tribes, and said, look at this outrage that just happened in Benjamin. The gang raped her and killed her. And that began a civil war against Benjamin. So here it's just very interesting that Shaul is from Benjamin, and they were the kind of like the bad actors in that whole story. here he cuts up a yoke, and in a certain way he does the same thing. He sends them to all the different tribes in order, that was their way of communication then. So everyone from Israel joins together. It says that 300,000 soldiers from the different tribes came together, plus 30,000 from Yehuda. So in those days, it was a huge number. And they're going to protect the people of Yavesh Gilad. Shaul sends a message to them saying, we're on our way. By the morning, we'll be there to protect you. And that's what it was. Shaul divided up his army into three camps, and they attacked Nachash, the Ammonites, and totally defeated them. And they scattered in every direction. And so the people, their reaction was, where are all the people who said Shaul is king? We need Shaul as king. And they wanted to punish them. And Shaul said, no, we had a great victory today. Just leave it. Leave it. But this was Shaul's first test. And he obviously passed it because in a certain way he saved a whole city or whole district of Israel. And now people see, well, we have a king. We have a king. And so it says that they offered up offerings, and it says that they celebrated very, very much. So this, in a certain way, reminds us when Shaul comes upon the band of prophets, and he also begins to prophesy. And there we learn that one of the verses is, and he became a different person. So here, once Shaul had that experience of ecstatic joy, so here we see again, and all the people who were with him joined together, and they had this huge celebration. Okay, now we're on chapter 12. And so Shmuel now says to all of Israel, you now have a king. I am very old. I've walked before you all of this time. And it's kind of like the handing over of the reins, the changing of the guard. And he makes a whole speech. For those who have been following, one of the themes that we've touched on over and over again is comparing Shmuel to Moshe. Because we have a verse, Moshe v'Aaron b'kohanav, u'Shmuel b'korei shemo. There's a verse that compares Moshe and Aaron to Shmuel. Moshe and Aaron of God's priests, and Shmuel who calls in his name. And so I'm not going to go back over, but throughout this whole story, there are all these connections or comparisons between Moshe and Shmuel. So here, this is right out of Parshat Korach, when Korach challenges Moshe. So Moshe turns to God, and he says to God, he says, I haven't taken even a donkey from them. I've taken nothing from the people. Like, please come to my aid and show them that you chose me as the leader. Here, Shmuel does the exact same thing. But this time he says to the people, he says, have I taken anything from you? Have I defrauded you? Have I oppressed you? Have I taken a bribe? Have I taken anything from you? If so, tell me and I'll return it. And if not, let God be witness that my leadership was completely to do the will of God. And the people responded and said, yes, you never took anything from us, and you served us. And then it says that Shmuel wanted them to give witness. And so it says, Vayomer aid. And the people said, witness. In other words, we confirm your words. But it's pointed out that the word Vayomer is in the singular. So you would think it would say Vayomru aid. And they all said together, we are witnesses that you haven't taken anything from us. But it's written in the singular. So one of the explanations is that not that the people didn't witness, but a voice came from heaven, what's called a bat kol. A voice came from heaven and said, Ed, witness. That God himself confirmed that Shmuel had not taken anything from them. But here's another comparison with Moshe. Moshe does this in Parshat Korach, and Shmuel does it here. There's one other interesting thing where when Shmuel, I'm going back a little bit, when Shmuel says that I am now old and my beard is very gray, it's just an expression. In other words, I'm reaching the end of my life. And so there's a deep hint here that according to tradition, Shmuel died at age 52. And we're going to actually see that comes up shortly. He dies at the age of 52. We're done with Purim, which means that the next stop is Pesach. So in the Haggadah of Pesach, there's a story of 5 rabbis who come together. And they're having Seder with Rebbe Akiva in Bnei Brak. And they go the whole night until the morning. They're talking about coming out of Egypt until the students come and say, Rabotenu, Higi Zman Kriyat Shema Shel Shachrit. Rebbes, it's time to say Shema in the morning. There's a lot of commentary about what that means. Some say that they were actually planning the revolt against the Romans that night. There are different opinions. The simple idea is they just stayed up all night recalling the story, doing what we're supposed to do on Pesach night. But right after that, it says like this, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He says, Hare ani keben shivim shana, v'lo zachiti she'etei amar yetziat Mitzrayim b'leilot. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I am like a person who's 70 years old, and I never understood the idea that we have to mention going out of Egypt even in the nights. Because we know that in the Torah it makes it clear that we have to remember coming out of Egypt every day. But he said, I didn't understand that we have to do it at night. Ad she'dersha ben Zoma, until Ben Zoma explained a certain verse. And now I understand that we have to remember coming out of Egypt in the day and the night. And that is what we do. In Shachrit, we mention it. And in the evening prayer, we mention coming out of Egypt. Why am I bringing this up here? So who is this Elazar ben Azariah? Without going into the whole story, Rebbe Eliezer, he was the top rabbi of the time. He was very, very strict. And like I said, without going into the whole story, there was like a revolt among the rabbis that he was being too strict. And then the question, well, who do we appoint? He was head of the Sanhedrin. Who do we appoint? So they appointed Elazar ben Azariah. Now, the amazing thing is, he was only 18 years old. The ones who appointed him were much, much older, were great, great scholars. But he was, let's say he was like a compromise candidate. Obviously, he was at a very high level that at 18 that even thought to compare him with Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Tarfon, all of these greats who were sitting in Bnei Brak. Anyways, again, why am I telling this whole story? Is the way the Gemara says is, he said, I have to ask my wife first. And he asked his wife, and she said she was not in favor of it. She kind of felt kind of like you're a compromise candidate. It's not going to last. And you're so young compared to everyone. So the story goes that night, all of his hair turned white. And that's what's alluded to here when he says, Ani ben shivim shana. I'm like someone of 70 years old. I'm only 18. But all my hair turned white. So I'm like someone who's 70 years old. So again, I'll say, why am I telling you all of this? Because the Arizal reveals that this Elazar ben Azariah was a Gilgul of Shmuel Navi. Shmuel Navi died at 52. Here he's 18. So 52 and 18 equals 70. So that's the deeper meaning that the Ari revealed when he says, I am like 70 years because I'm 18 now. But whether he knew it consciously or not, he's like 70 years old because he has the 52 years of Shmuel and Navi standing behind him. So that is a little digression, but a very, very interesting one. Hopefully everyone will remember that when it comes time for the Haggadah. Okay, so the people and God give witness that Shmuel has been totally Mesirat Nefesh for the people, took nothing for himself. And then Shmuel continues, and he talks about how God saved them when he took them out of Egypt, and how in the book, and we learned this in the book of Shoftim, we learned that there was a certain theme that returned over and over again, that the people started worshiping idols, turned away from the Torah, turned away from God. God would send an enemy, or you could say because of the laws of measure for measure, they brought their enemies upon themselves. Both of those statements are true and don't have to be a contradiction. And then the people would cry out because they were being terribly oppressed. And then God would send them one of these judges to save them. That the whole book of Shoftim is the same cycle over and over again. So here Shmuel reminds them that for hundreds of years, this is what happened. You went off, you turned away from God. God sent an enemy. You cried out. God sent a redeemer. And so Shmuel is reminding them of this. One second. And then he says, and now you wanted a king. And I was a little upset, and God was a little bit upset, but God gave you your king. And but now I'm going to show you something so you'll understand what you've done here. In other words, it wasn't correct for you to ask for a king the way that you did. And we already discussed this, that there's a bit of seeming like a contradiction here, because in the Torah, it talks about anointing a king. And we also have a tradition that when we came in Israel, we had 3 mitzvot to do: appoint a king, destroy Amalek, and build the temple. That's a tradition. That's how it was supposed to be. Of course, it didn't happen like that. So we have this contradiction. So why is God and Shmuel upset that now the people are asking for a king? So again, it's more like how they did it and their motivations and what they thought they would accomplish by having a king. And so Shmuel wants to send them a sign so that they would they would kind of learn the ramifications of what they've done. And so he says it was right before Shavuos, meaning the rains had stopped. In fact, usually they last until around Pesach. And then every once in a while, there might be a short rain in the month of Iyar. But here, they were almost at Shavuos. And so Shmuel says, I want to show you a sign here that you'll understand and have yira, have awe of God. And he says, it is harvest time. Shavuos is the wheat harvest. God is going to send thunder and lightning and rain. And as he spoke, that's exactly what happened. Thunder, lightning, rain, and the people were like didn't know what to do with themselves. They were like what they were full of fear. So they turned to Shmuel and say, please, you turn to God. Don't turn away from us. We see God is a little upset here. So here again, we have another comparison with Moshe, because when God spoke to us at Mount Sinai, so we're told that every word that God spoke, our souls left our bodies. It was such an awesome experience that they couldn't handle it, and they turned to Moshe, and it's in the Torah, and said, "You speak to God. It's too much for us, and you tell us what He says." It's almost exact here also. The same thing. The people say that you speak to God, and you pray for us that God forgives us for having turned away from Him. And so here, when we finish this class, we're going to be doing the Haftorah. And in the Haftorah, one of the themes is that God says to the Jewish people, I'm not going to save you so much for your merits, but for my holy name. Because when my people are in exile, it's desecrating my holy name. And so this, many people, in fact, use this in our prayers to God for 2,000 years. And you could see it in Tachanun, is God, save us for your sake, because your name is being run through the mud by us being in exile and oppressed like this. And so that's what Shmuel tells him, that God, for his holy name, he will not abandon you. He made a covenant with Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and he will abide by it. So here, I want to get into something a little bit deeper, because I already mentioned that we have somewhat of a contradiction with this whole idea of having a king. Is it a good thing? Is it not a good thing? Was it permitted? Was it forbidden? And if it's permitted, then why are Shmuel and God so upset? Okay, we've already given the answers. It's the way that they asked for it. But we want to understand, why did Shmuel decide to ask God to do this sign of thunder and lightning and rain, not in its season? And so many answers are given, but the first question that we have to ask is, if God was upset with them for asking for a king, why didn't he just say no? Why didn't he just say to Shmuel, go tell the people you didn't ask for a king properly. You don't know what you're getting into. You don't know what you're asking for. No. But God said yes. And that's how Shaul became king. So a very good explanation here, and it's not just for this circumstances. It says, and the question is if asking for a king is so bad, why did God go along with it? And so here it says, one of the commentaries, and it's a very important commentary, says that this is the power of free will that God has given to human beings. That even though God can intercede at any time in a person's life, in a community's life, in a family's life, in a nation's life, in the world's life, but the rule is God allows everything to go according what we'll call the laws of nature. And part of the laws of nature is that human beings have free will. And so one of the expressions is, if someone wants to make themselves impure, God will go along with it. And if someone wants to make themselves pure, God will open the door for them. Now, obviously, God does intercede. God does do miracles. Again, it's still Shushan Purim. And we're told that the miracles of Purim are the greatest of all of the miracles because they were done through the laws of nature. No law of nature was superseded here. No seas split, no seven heavens opened, no thunder and lightning and rain, not in its season just because Shmuel said so. In general, God allows people, you want to become impure, God is not going to stop you. At a certain point, God might help you and intercede, but basically, God allows everything to go according to nature. So even though God was not happy with how they chose to ask for a king, he allowed it anyway. So this idea runs through all of our lives. It's a very, very important concept. And we're always juggling God's divine providence and free will at the same time. So one of the reasons that Shmuel called upon God to do this miracle is it was kind of like saying, what did you need a king for? I asked God to bring thunder and lightning, and with a snap of my fingers, it's here. Not as an ego thing, but he's trying to say, you had all of these great judges. Why do you think you needed a king right now? What drove you? But again, it was like, we want to be like the other nations. So he was trying to show them that, now remember, Shmuel is a transitional figure. He's a judge, but he's also a prophet. And so he's trying to show them, you already have tzaddikim. You don't know what you're getting into by appointing a king. That's one explanation. Another explanation is, why do you need a king? God can change nature, even though we just said that in general, God does not change nature. But of course, God does at certain times do the miraculous. And so he's trying to show them, you think the king is going to do miracles for you? God is the king. He's the one. How do you think you got this far? That's why Shmuel reviewed coming out of Egypt and how God had sent all of these judges to save them. So this is just a little bit deeper understanding of what's going on with this story. Okay, now we're in the 13th chapter. Excuse me. You regulars know, almost every class I feel I have to sneeze. And it never happens. So that was my almost sneeze for the night. Okay, so now we're going to do this fairly quickly. Chapter 13 begins that Shaul has reigned for 1 year, and now it's saying what happened in the second year. So there's actually explanations that Shaul only ruled for 2 years. He ruled more than that, but actually the kingship was taken away from him after only 2 years. That's what we're going to learn about right now. So here, again, the Philistines are attacking Israel, and Shaul blows the shofar, gathers up the troops, and the Philistines this time are coming with it says more soldiers than you can even count, more than the sand on the seashore. Obviously, that's just a metaphor, but they're about to attack with a huge army. And Shaul is trying to gather the people together, but the people are very scared this time, and they're hiding in the caves. They're leaving their homes. The Philistines wouldn't allow anyone who worked with metal to do their work, so they couldn't make weapons. And so it's not looking good. And Shaul was in Gilgal, and apparently Shmuel told him, I'm coming to Gilgal, wait for me, and we will do offerings and we'll pray. But the people started scattering from Shaul, and he becomes very, very nervous. And so he goes ahead and he brings offerings. And then Shmuel came. And Shmuel says to him, what have you done? Remember, Shmuel is the prophet. Now, in the book of Shoftim that I mentioned, where it has the laws of the kings, it also has the laws of prophets. And this is what's called the division of powers in government. There's certain powers that a king has over, let's say, a prophet, and there's certain certain powers that a prophet has over a king. So Shmuel told Shaul to wait for him, and Shaul went ahead and didn't. So he says, "What have you done?" And he said, "The people were scattering, and so I just went ahead and did it." And here, this is very, very significant, because here Shmuel says, you acted very foolishly, very foolishly. And he says, the way that Shmuel told him to wait was like a commandment from God. It was like Shmuel was acting in God's, according to God's will. And so right there in the middle of the 13th chapter, he tells him, your kingship will not endure. God is going to take away the kingship from you and give it to someone literally after his own heart, after God's heart. So here, we're going to usually, we think of Shaul losing the kingship, and probably we'll get to it next week, when they fight against Amalek. And Shaul is ordered to wipe out Amalek. And we're going to get to that story, so I don't want to go into it now. And Shaul didn't completely follow Shmuel's instructions. And there, Shmuel makes it very clearly, God is taking away the kingship. But here, most people pass over this and don't realize that already Shmuel, here in chapter 13, is telling him, your kingship is not going to last. And it's for the same reason. From the beginning of the story of Shaul is because his over humbleness. He doesn't want to exert his power. You would think that's a good thing. Shaul, in a certain way, is a very, very tragic figure because he really means well. He really tries to do his best, and he keeps on stumbling because he won't exert his. Sometimes he does. We saw when he cut up the yoke of the oxen and sent it, and he gathered 300,000 soldiers and won the war. So he had it in him. But many times he got nervous. The people he couldn't say, we have to stay until Shmuel comes. That's what Shmuel told us, and that's what we're going to do. But he didn't have that kind of discipline or strength. And so here, the kingship is taken away from him. Later, there'll be a second incident that we'll get to next week, where we'll see it's like official. That's where David enters the whole story. So here, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, that Shmuel leaves, but they still have a war to fight. The Philistines are coming. So Shaul gathers the people, and his son Yonatan. Here's where Yonatan will become a very important figure in the whole story of David. He's first introduced here, that he's Shaul's son, and he is next in line to be king at this point. And so he leads like a raiding party against the Philistines, and he is successful. And the way that it happens is that, and it's very similar to the story of Gideon, where God tells Gideon, here it doesn't say that God told Yonatan to do what he's about to do. The story of Gideon, God said to Gideon, go down into the camp of the enemy and hear what they're saying. And if you remember, Gideon disguises himself, goes into the camp, And he hears one guy relating a dream that he had, and that this loaf of barley bread rolled through the camp and knocked down the tents. And the person he was telling said, "This is the sword of Gidon." And Gidon hears this, and now he knows that God has given the enemy into his hands. Here, Yonatan, with just one person, they are sneaking towards the Philistine camp. And remember, there's like more Philistines than you can even count. And he says, and it's also like a sign. He says to his arms bearer, he says, when we approach the Philistine guards, if they say to us, "Halt, we're coming to you to check you out," that means we're not ready to fight the Philistines yet. But if they say to us, "Halt, come to us and we'll check you out," that is a sign that we will be victorious. And that's what happened. The guards see them and they say, "Come to us so we could check you out." Yonatan goes, and there's a small group, there's around 20 men, and Yonatan is able to kill all of them. And then he escapes, but this caused pandemonium in the Philistines' camp. Shaul has relatively a small, tiny army with him at this point. And nonetheless, that this turned the whole story around, and Shaul was able to defeat the Philistines. And it was because of Yonatan's bravery. But then this story, it's a very seemingly strange story. Shaul orders everyone, "We're going into war. I put a curse on anyone who eats until the evening when we will be able to defeat our enemy." So they were all fasting. They were fighting and fasting. And so what happened when Yonatan, now Shaul didn't even know that Yonatan had done this. On the way back, and Yonatan wasn't there when Shaul proclaimed a curse on anyone who eats anything. So on the way back, the story says that there was honey in the field. It's not clear what that means, because usually you have honey in a beehive. It could have been perhaps date honey that was dripping from the tree. One explanation was that it was like sugar cane. It was a type of plant that had a very sweet sap. Anyways, Yonatan took his spear and he just touched it and he ate a little bit of it. And it says that his eyes were enlightened. And then he's told that his father put a curse on anyone who eats anything. And Yonatan here, and this leads to a whole discussion that we're not going to get into, is when is a person allowed to disagree with their rabbi or their parents? And if you do disagree, how do you go about it? But here, Yonatan, when he hears that Shaul had put a curse on anyone who ate, so he said, "I just ate the tiniest bit. I didn't know. I didn't do it on purpose, but I ate just a little bit. My father, it wasn't right that he had everyone fasting." Can you imagine how much quicker they would have been able to defeat their enemies if they weren't weakened from the fast? Again, we're going through this fairly quickly, but they defeat their enemies, and then the people are starving. The people are starving, and so they take the enemy's animals, the kosher ones, and they slaughter them. And word gets back to Shaul that they're so hungry, they're eating it with the blood. And we know even for mitzvah, Sheva mitzvah b'nei Noach, you can't eat an animal with its blood while it's still alive. It's not clear that that's what they did here. It's actually understood is that they slaughtered in a correct way, but they were so hungry they didn't do the koshering where you have to take salt and remove all the blood, because they were so hungry that they weren't careful about getting all the blood out of the animals. So Shaul was very upset about this, and he did exert his authority, and he made everyone stop, and he made everyone do it in a correct way. But then he finds out that his son had not listened to his decree. And he says, anyone who didn't listen to my decree, even if it's my own son, he will die. And there's a whole question here, and it's very similar to a story that we learned in Shoftim. And this is how we will end the class tonight, is that if you remember, Yiftach made a vow before he went to war, and he said, God, if you let me defeat our enemies, the first thing that comes out to greet me, I will offer it up as an offering. So he's thinking, I'm going to come home. Let's say he lives on, we'll call it a ranch, and he has lots of animals. So he's thinking as he's approaching the house, one of the sheep or goats or cows is going to come towards him, and he'll offer it up. We learned it was his daughter. His daughter came out. And so there was a whole thing. Now, obviously, the laws of vows are, if you make a vow and it's not under like reasonable circumstances, or it's not what you meant, you can nullify the vow. Vows are very important, but Yiftach or anyone wouldn't have thought that they're talking about their daughter who's going to come out and greet them. And we learned that he didn't want to nullify his vow. So here it's similar. It was clear to everyone, including Shaul, that Yonatan wasn't there. He couldn't have heard his order not to eat. And so therefore, the vow he made to curse anyone who ate was not a legitimate vow. And so he's not backing down. But the people stand up to Shaul and say, like, what are you doing? Yonatan saved us today. He began this whole thing that led to our victory. We won't allow you to kill Yonatan. And that's how the story ends. So here again, we see that Shaul it's really hard to like pinpoint it. He's a tragic figure. He's not completely at home with being king. He struggles with exerting power. And here we have a case that he's exerting power where it doesn't belong. Other times he was successful. He did lead this war. It wasn't just Yonatan. Shaul was very, very brave. But we see that it's a bit of a tragic story here. And so here we end. And I just want to go back, is that they had defeated the Philistines, but not completely. And so Shaul wants to continue fighting, but they asked, apparently the high priest was there, and they asked the Urim the Tumim. the special, we'll call it oracle, that when existential questions had to be asked. So Shaul wanted to know, well, should we push ahead or should we not push ahead? And the answer was, don't push ahead. And so Shaul interpreted that, meaning that someone must have broken this curse that I gave. So this is very similar to the story of Achan in the book of Yeshua, where the whole army was defeated because of one person. So Shaul is thinking, someone didn't listen to my order. And he's causing the Philistines are going to get away because the Urim and Tumim are saying, don't fight right now. And that's what led to this whole idea of Shaul is going to now punish someone, even if it's its son, Yonatan. And so I'll just do the end of the chapter, end of chapter 14. And here it says, this is the first time that we're getting the family of Shaul. You would think maybe once he was first king, we would learn about his whole family, but only here. So it says, this is in the 49th verse, and it says that Shaul's son was Yonatan and Yishvi and Malchishua, and he had two daughters. One, the firstborn was Meirav, and the second was Michal. This is important because Michal will end up being David's wife. And the name of Shaul's wife was Achinoam, who is the daughter of Achimaaz. And the name of the captain of his army, again, this will become important later in the story, was Avner ben Ner. And who was Shaul's uncle. So Avner was Shaul's uncle, and his father was Kish. We learned this already, and that comes up in the story of Purim, that Mordechai was from the lineage of Kish. And then the chapter ends by saying that that Shaul was constantly at war with the Philistines, and any strong man that he saw, he would kind of grab him for the army because he was constantly fighting against the Philistines. We've learned this. The whole book of Shmuel is just one war after the other. Reminds us very, very much of our present situation, that Israel is 75 years old, a little bit older now. Just one war after another, one war after another. So things have not changed all that much, but we do hope that they will, and very, very soon. Okay, as everyone knows, we are going right to the Haftarah. Welcome everyone to Insights into the Weekly Haftarah. So this coming week is Parshat Vayakel. Many times we read two portions, Vayakel and Pekudei. This year we only read one, but it's also what's called Shabbat Para. There are four special readings that we do right before the month of Adar to right before the month of Nisan. Parshat Para is the third of the four readings. And so therefore we have a special Haftarah. all four of the readings, we don't read the usual Haftorah for that parsha. But what I want to do is I want to go over what would be the usual Haftorah for Vayakel, and then also discuss the special Haftorah for Para. So the usual Haftorah for Yakel comes from the first book of Kings, in the 7th chapter. Now, the whole parsha of Vayakel is Moshe returns with the second Luchot. This is after 3 periods of 40 days. The first 40 days is to receive the Torah. He comes down with the 2 tablets. They're worshiping the golden calf. That was last week. And then Moshe breaks the tablets. And then he spends 2 more 40-day periods praying for forgiveness and receiving the second tablets. So Moshe, according to tradition, is coming down on Yom Kippur, the 10th of Tishrei. That was, in a sense, the first Yom Kippur. And now, for the first time, Moshe is telling the people about building a Mishkan. We've had a lot about the Mishkan already, but that was all between God and Moshe. Moshe had not revealed yet what the whole idea of building a Mishkan was. So the whole parsha of Vayakel is about building the tabernacle in the desert. So obviously the Haftarah is going to be something about building the first temple. So here in the 7th chapter, it's a specific. And here, what's interesting is Sfardim and Ashkenazim have 2 different opinions as to which Haftarah is read. The interesting thing is they're right next to each other. In other words, Sfardim read from the 13th verse to the 26th verse of the 7th chapter, and the Ashkenazim start on the 40th verse to the 50th verse, but all the same chapter. So it's all about details about building the Mishkan. And here, though, almost all of the emphasis is on just 2 elements in the temple. And both of them, what's interesting is, are not mentioned in the Mishkan. Now we know that the temple in Jerusalem was based on the model of the Mishkan. The Mishkan, though, was a tent. The Beit HaMikdash was a building, but still it had the Holy of Holies, the Holy Ark, the menorah, the showbread, the altar for the incense, and the altar outside for the offerings. That was the basic plan of the temple. But here, in these 2 haftarahs, 2 different elements are added that were not in the Mishkan. And that was that in the entrance coming into the temple were 2 pillars. 2 pillars. And they were 18 cubits high, which is not tremendous, but a cubit is approximately 1.5 feet. So these are somewhere between 25 and 30 feet high. And they were very elaborate. And on the top, they had like a crown, and they had pomegranates carved into the stone. And they were called, and they're named here in the Haftarah of the ones that the Sfardim read, is called Yachin and Boaz. They had names. They had names for these 2 pillars. It's not clear, these are not usual names. Yachin comes from the root lahachin, to prepare. So it could be as they entered into the temple, it was a sign to prepare yourself for a spiritual experience. And the other one was Boaz, which means in it is strength. And so the temple represents the headquarters of the meeting place between God and the Jewish people, and ultimately between God and all of humanity. And so it was a place of strength. One of the names of the temple is Beit HaBachira, the house of choice. Why? Is because in the Torah, God says over and over that he will put his name in a certain place. And that will be the place of the temple. So in this Haftorah, it speaks extensively about these two pillars and what was called the Yam. Now in the Mishkan, this is somewhat based on the model. There was a laver of water that when you entered in to the temple, especially the Kohanim, they had to wash their hands and feet. And so there was a special laver. Here in the temple, Shlomo built this huge, it was called the Yam, meaning the sea. There are different opinions, but one of the opinions is it was big enough to hold 16,000 gallons of water. It was this huge sea, like a yam. And we know that the temple and the Mishkan were a microcosm of the whole universe. So this did represent all of the seas in a certain way, and the idea of purity. So what's interesting is on Shabbat, many people have the custom of reading a beautiful, beautiful poem song called Kel Mistater, God who is hidden. And it goes through the 10 sfirot in order. And each of the stanzas mentions the name of the sphira. In Hebrew, the poetry is magnificent. It just flows. And it gives over the essence of each of the sfirot in very few words. So what's interesting, though, is when we get to one of the stanzas is for Netzach, and the next one is for Hod. But in the stanza for Hod, it mentions Netzach and Hod, because Netzach and Hod are considered like the legs. They always go together. The Sfirot follow the model of a body. Chesed is the right arm, Gevurah is the left arm, Tiferet is the heart, Chachma, Bin, and Dad is the head, and Netzach and Hod are the legs. Well, the legs are like pillars. And so here, I'm just going to read it in Hebrew. It says, Miyamin umismal yinikat hanaviim. From the right and from the left is where the prophets draw from. According to the Arizal, we'll call it the headquarters of prophecy. We might think it would be in Keter or Chachma or Bina or Dat. He says it's in Netzach and Hod. So here in this poem, it says from the right and the left, meaning, we're going to see in a second, these are these two pillars, Yachin and Boaz. It says this is where the prophets draw their inspiration. Then it says, Netzach v'Hod mehem nimsaim, that this is where the prophets are getting their inspiration. Then it says, Yachin uBoaz. These are the names of these two pillars. B'Shem Nikraim. These pillars have names. And as we just discussed, V'chol b'nayich l'mudei Hashem. And all those who are all of the children who learn from God. And this is the idea that there's a statement that everyone in Israel is b'nei nevi'im, children of prophets. We may not be prophets, but we're children. We have a legacy of prophecy. So that's in this song, Kel Mistater. So these are the two haftorahs that we usually read for Vayakel. But as I said, because it's Parsha Para, we read a special haftorah. Why do we have this Parsha of Para? This is the Para Duma. This is all about if someone is impure from the impurity of death. This is the ritual that would purify someone. And it's explained in Parshat Chukat in the book of Numbers, how they took a paraduma, a red heifer, along with azov and cedar wood and a red string, and they would slaughter the animal and mix it with pure water and then sprinkle the people, and that would purify people from the impurity of death. So why are we reading this now? Is because Pesach, everyone was commanded to come to the temple. It was a pilgrimage holiday. And you couldn't enter the temple if you were impure. So people had to do this ritual in order to be able to bring the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering. So we read it now. We don't have a temple. We don't have the Pesach offering. But we read it as a remembrance that Pesach is coming and it's time to purify yourselves to be able to go into the temple. So the haftorah that's chosen that is going to be comparable to this idea comes from Ezekiel, Yechezkel, 36th chapter, verses 16 through 38. And here, it's all about Israel becoming impure and defiled because of turning to idols. That's what is happening here. God is commanding Yechezkel to tell the people how impure you are from worship because of worshiping idols. And here I mentioned this in the class of Shmuel Aleph, that God says, and I'll read it, God says to the house of Israel, "Not for your sake do I act, O house of Israel, but for my holy name that you have desecrated among the nations to which you have come. And I will sanctify my great name that was desecrated among the nations." And then it continues that God is now promising them that he will bring Israel back to the fold. He'll bring them back to the land, and he will purify them from their impurity. That's why this was chosen. And the verse, the key verse here, is a verse that we repeat on Yom Kippur many times. And that is, V'zarakti Aleichem. God is speaking here through the prophet. I will pour upon you Mayim Toharim, pure waters, Utartem Mikol Tumotechem, and you will be purified from all of your impurities. Umikol Gilulechem Ataheretchem, and from all of your idol worship, I will purify you. And then it goes on in beautiful fashion that God says that when I purify you, I will bring you back to the land, and it will become like a garden of Eden again. And all the nations will know that I am God because I am bringing you back and rebuilding the ruins and replanting the wasteland. So, of course, we are in the process right now. That's why everyone knows that we're in the time of redemption, but we're not quite there, which makes it, we're so close, but sometimes it feels so far. Here, God has brought us back to the land. The cities have been rebuilt. The land is productive. We're just waiting. We're waiting for, really, in a certain way, for Israel to turn back to God And Bezrat Hashem, God will bring the final redemption soon and in our days. L'chaim, everyone, l'chaim. Good Purim, good Purim. Okay, Toby, I see your hand's been up, at least in the box there. But let me first. Okay, we're recording again. Oh, I need to, I'm sorry, to unmute everyone. Everyone's unmuted, and I've opened the chats. Toby, since your hand has been up, you can go first if you're there. Okay, maybe Toby's not there right now. Okay, so let's go to everyone's unmuted. Brenda says, so glad to be in classes again. Right, last week we didn't have classes. They certainly increase our joy in the month of Adar. And what a great song to call us all in. Okay, so I just want to say again that we dedicated the class today to Adel Bat Moshe David, a descendant of one of the main students of the Baal Shem Tov, Zev Wolf Kitzis, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and a friend of mine from the Moshav who passed away, Shmuel ben Shalom, Shlomo, and Miriam. They should both have an aliyah to neshama. And Shmuel is Shmuel Silver. Some of you may know the Silver, Shmuel and his wife Nechama. Bracha asked if I connected the YouTube folks. Yes, right in the beginning. Amy says, donkeys seem to play a huge role throughout the various books of the Tanakh. Can you please discuss the Kabbalistic meaning or other possible meanings of their prominence in our story? Okay, so each story is going to be different, but what we have mentioned is that the word in Hebrew for a donkey is a chamor, and it's the same root as materialism, as physicality. Each time that donkeys appear, it might have a different meaning. The three donkeys that Shaul goes looking for his father, it's not clear why that's the connection, but we do know that the tradition that Mashiach will come riding on a donkey means exactly that. The Mashiach will be able to harness material reality and infuse it with spirituality. That's clear according to all commentaries. That's the symbolism of the Mashiach coming riding on a donkey. And it's also the symbolism of the blessing that Yaakov gives to Yehuda when you have to go back to Parshat Vayechi in the book of Genesis. But there, a lot of his blessing is how he will tie his donkey to the grapevine, and how the grapevine will be so productive and his eyes will be red with wine. All of this has to do with those who have Orchard of Delights. Go to Parshat Vayechi, and I love this Torah to understand the whole blessing to Yehuda and the role of the donkey in the blessing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Baracha says, can't Vayomer in the singular show unity of Ken Yehiratzon? Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. Just to review, when Shmuel wants everyone to be witness that he hasn't taken anything from them, It says Vayomer Aid, and he said Aid. So we discussed, why does it say in the plural? They said. So I don't know if I said it, maybe I didn't say it. One opinion is it was actually a voice from heaven. It was God who was saying witness, but Bracha very rightfully is pointing out that the fact that it's in the singular means that they all proclaimed it at once. Everyone agreed and were a witness that Shmuel had not taken anything. So if I didn't say it, Bracha, thank you for pointing that out. David says, I'm curious about Benjamin's connection to the energy of the end and the last son, the end of a cycle of growth, and its connection to the beginning, Reuven, son of the right hand. That's what Reuven means. Well, it means more sight, Ra'u.
Sorry, Benjamin.
Oh, Benjamin, yes, okay. Sorry, yes. Son of the right hand, that's what Benjamin means, Ben-Yamin. Remember, Rachel, who died in childbirth, wanted to name him Ben-Oni, the son of my distress. But Yaakov said, no, I'm not going to stick him with that name. We're going to call him Ben-Yamin, the son of my right hand. So David continues. So the son of the right hand speaks to the final action of bringing the spiritual, the right side, into the physical, which evokes the creation of the Mishkan temple, which ends up in Benjamin's territory. Correct. Benjamin is specially connected to the building. This fashioning of the physical home is I have to make this bigger. Wait 1 second. Where did I go? Which is this fashioning of the physical home is the end moment, but the danger of seeing Reuven, the spiritual reality, as a physical form, is that we can end up focusing on the physical form and forgetting about the spiritual life it encloses. And that's actually what all the prophets came to say in God's name, that they had lost track of what the temple meant altogether, which is Reuven's big mistake when he went up to his father's couch. We are entering this complex energy now in the calendar as we finish up reading about the building of the tabernacle and look to its setting up on the 1st of Nisan when it becomes fully visible. Okay, so David said a lot here. David, would you like to try to summarize what you're trying to get to here?
Yeah, it is that Benjamin is connected to the final act of bringing the spiritual down.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with bringing the spiritual down, so somehow we have to get a new cycle started here. There has to be like this generation that forgot about Joseph, and something has to happen where the light needs to come out of the darkness again. So what it looks like happens is that if you come back around to the beginning, vision is very important, but you're just seeing the outside. So Benjamin is the act of creating the final vessel, but Reuben is seeing the final vessel and missing the spiritual inside of it. And so that's the challenge of reaching the end. The challenge of reaching the end is now you're holding the thing in your hand. Don't let it distract you.
Right. You're saying beautifully, because Adar is the end of the year. Nisan is the beginning of the year. And we end the year with the building of the Mishkan. We end this parsha, next week's parsha, we end, and then we start something new, is the service in the temple. And I think what David's trying to point out here that there's a great danger when we lose track, we don't see properly, and what we're left with is just a physical shell. And as I said, that's what all the prophets came and basically in God's name said, like, you've lost total track of what the temple is about and what the service is about. It's all outside, it's all superficial. And therefore, the temple had to be destroyed. The physical embodiment of these spiritual principles became too physical. I believe that's what you're trying to say, and it goes along with the end of the year and the beginning of the year. Is that correct, David?
Yes, we're reading about the building of the
Yeah,
tabernacle now. It's going to be set up
yeah,
on Nisan 1.
yeah,
But it also found myself asking the question, well, what does that have to do with Shaul? And I don't necessarily mean this in a bad way, but he had the physical shell unlike anyone else. He was, head and shoulders above
right.
everyone.
You're right.
But it makes me almost feel like, as I read about him, that he had a Benjamin outside and a Reuben inside. I don't mean that in a bad way, because every aspect has its positive and negative, and Reuben has his positive and his negative.
Mhm.
But they're connected. The end and the beginning are connected. And so I feel like when I read about King Shaul, he has this superior outside, but a very youthful, infantile. Well, I mean, we all have to begin somewhere, right? But there's
Yeah,
something on the inside that's not fully formed.
exactly. Exactly. And actually, next week, it's going to become very clear to us when the kingship is taken away from Shaul, and the whole story of how Shmuel anoints David in, in secret to be the next king. And I don't want to give that away, but that's next week. And it has very much to do this with, because when Shmuel is looking at the sons of Yishai, he's looking at the outside. Remember, we learned he when Shaul first approaches him looking for the prophet, he says, I am the seer. I am the prophet. I'm the one who sees. And here we see God says to him, you're not seeing correctly. You're only seeing the outside. That's what David is talking about here. He says, I'm looking at the inside, at the heart. And that was David. And that we'll get to next week, Bezrat Hashem. Thank you, David. David, that was very insightful. Bracha says, it's very depressing that we constantly mess up in bad ways. Maybe that's why I find Nevi'im challenging compared to the Chumash, which has a variety of focuses and has lots of encouraging stories and ethical guidance to encourage people in what's important in life. Bracha, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, the book of Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel, Kings. There are a lot of hard stories here. But I'll just remind you, but of course, the book of Bamidbar has a lot of challenging stories, but you're right. The whole Chumash together has a nice blend. Here, it's just war after war, challenge after challenge, defeat after defeat, trial after trial. I hear you. Yeah. You want to say something?
I wish I had something to say on this. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, you know what? I actually did. I did write about this idea very, very much about Yaakov and Esav. Why is it that God put Yaakov in the position that he came out second? Why did he have to fight for the blessing, fight for being the firstborn, fight to marry, his first love? his whole life, Yaakov is put in the position. So the question is, why is God doing this? And so my answer, and this will work for a partial answer for what you're pointing out here, rightfully, is Yaakov, when he gets a new name, Yisrael. So the Torah tells us what Yisrael means. Ki sarita im Elokim ve'anashim ve'tuchal. You have contended, you have fought with, you have challenged God and man, and you have prevailed. In other words, and this goes along with what we learned tonight, why did God allow Israel to appoint a king if he didn't think it was a good idea? And here we have a very challenging idea that God gives us free will. It's our greatest gift and our greatest challenge. And so our lives, it's not just we're reading about Shmuel and Shaul and struggle. That's our life. So God sees that this is the destiny. The mission of Yaakov is to fight, to struggle. That is our, call it our fate, our destiny, because that's the nature of reality. And God needed a people who would be very, very strong, who would not give up, who would be stiff-necked, and would fight to fix the world until the end, and would not give up. So here we're learning very, very challenging stories, but the idea is that we have to take these stories and learn from them, and see the good qualities of Shaul and see his lackings. Wait till we get to David. David is David, but he had really a difficult life. David had a very difficult life, and you see it in Tehillim. He reached the heights of closeness to God and joy and praise and gratefulness, and he also reached the depths of despair and in his own words, Gehenna. But this is because that's the nature of reality. I'm going to go on a little bit about this because your comment is very important. If we go back to the whole story of Adam and Chava and the snake, and here Adam is cursed, the snake is cursed, Chava is cursed. So you would say, why is God doing this? Like, this is the way we start humanity. But the idea is, the Torah is not saying that these curses are good. Some people read it as God is this is reality. This is this is cause and effect. This is just the fruits that we create ourselves. So the Torah is a very realistic book. You look at the Torah, you say, this is a book of holiness. It's incense and war and rape and brothers hating each other and murder. And how is this a holy book? But that would be a very superficial way to look at it. This is reality. And yet, Yaakov, and through Yaakov, all of Israel is given the mission to deal with reality and to fix it. And so God put Yaakov through all of this. And the books that we're reading now is part of our history of what we've gone through. And look at today. We could also, here, the amazing thing, so many of these hostages are coming out like more connected to God and Torah than ever. You would think they would come out, God, why did you do this to me? I don't want anything to do with you. They're coming out just the opposite, because that is kind of the setup. That is our fate. That is what God wants from us, because reality is a hard reality. And so this is my answer to your comment, for better or for worse. Yeah. Okay, Bracha also says, what is the difference that made Moshe uncomfortable in leadership, be so successful compared to Shaul? Tremendous question. And that's what I said. I need to get more of a handle on the tragedy of Shaul's life. He's really a very tragic figure. And I haven't quite figured it out. We're going to really touch on it next week with Amalek, because he tries to do tshuva and God doesn't accept it. And we have, like, why? Here he's trying to do tshuva. We'll get to it next week. I don't want to go into it too much right now. But you're right. Moshe was always uncomfortable with leadership. But maybe the answer, I'm just doing this on one leg, maybe the answer is, as uncomfortable as he was, once he took on the mantle of leadership, he was firm about it. He knew that God had chosen him, and he knew that he could stand up to the people. How many times did they try to stone him, to go back to Egypt, to overthrow him? And no, once he accepted the mantle of leadership, I have to say, I believe it's in Fruits of the Orchard. I write a whole article about this. Exactly your question, Bracha, exactly your question. He made a transition at a certain point in his life, and he went with it. Shaul, like David pointed out, there was something, when we use the word immature, it doesn't mean like emotionally. It just, his whole being wasn't ready for kingship. He struggled with it, and he never could make that transition. And so I think that's the difference. That's the difference. And I understand that. That anyone in a position of leadership, we have to have a certain humbleness. It's like, do I really deserve to be in a position of leadership? And we're talking about even in small circumstances. But on the other hand, if we take upon ourselves leadership, we have to do it. We can't always be humble about it. And that's why I mentioned that shows great fall was his humbleness to a fault. He never was comfortable with leadership. Yes, David, your hand is up.
So the key to me for Shaul, I don't know if this is necessarily the right thing or not, but he's the first son that gets surpassed by the second son. You know how that happens over and over again in Torah, is the first son is the physical leaning one, the one who operates more in the natural than in the spiritual, and the second one operates more in the spiritual. And that second son has to rise above and take control. And so Shaul is physically gifted, but the spiritual is still immature. And so the question really comes, well, then why did God have him anointed? What is he trying to show us there?
Right.
And I think and Scripture is so clear about it because it's saying, look, Samuel didn't get this wrong. It also happened by lot. God did it twice, and
Mhm,
so
mhm.
and he's saying this is really my choice. And I think the reason is because they asked for a king like the nations around them, and he said, "Okay, I'm going to give you exactly what you asked for. I'm
You're
looking
right.
into the heart of the people.
You're
What the
right.
people want is that." And so that's exactly what I'm going to give them. And then they're going to experience the chaos of that. And then they'll know the peace that comes after that because they will have experienced that struggle.
David, you're very right because everyone asks, um, and actually we're going to get into it next week also, is if God saw this coming, why did he allow it? We already dealt with it a little bit with free will, but I think you touched on something which is very, very correct, is because of the way that Israel asked for a king, they wanted this physical. That's why he was truly described as being head over shoulders of everyone. But yeah, I have to point something out here. This really makes it more mysterious. The sages say that Shaul was a tremendous tzaddik. He really, on the inside, he was really a good person. He was really a tzaddik, very pure, very pure. But he, like you said, he was, we'll call it immature. Not positive that's the right word, but it works. And because that's how they asked for a king, and they wanted a physical king to fight their wars. That's what they wanted. In fact, it says explicitly that they wanted a king who would go out and lead them to battle. And so it's part of the mystery. But your point about the second son, here it's not literally a second son, but David is the second. So first is the king who like fails, and then comes the king who succeeds, and that is it's also a part of the cycles of Jewish history. So thank
If
you
I
for
could
pointing that out. That was very, very, very good.
just add
Okay,
one thing,
yeah, please.
there's a greatness of a child. There is a purity. Um, there's a righteous purity and greatness that a child has because of the child's innocence, and um, I could see that comment of the sage as being true, and in the other sense, he's not fully formed yet.
Yes, yeah, yeah. The time just wasn't right, and yet God allowed it because in some kind of divine providence, it needed to happen in that order. First Benjamin and then Yehuda. Okay, let's go on. Brenda says, I find it very interesting that the first king of Israel's very first battle was against the energy of Nachash. You're so right. The snake's energy. Just like the first man, Adam's first battle was against the energy of the snake. The spiral of these primordial battles seem very connected to each other. I agree with you. Also, the Nachash in today's lesson was threatening to take away the people's vision. Apparently, a probable component of the snake's energy is to distort or even abort the people's or a person's vision. So this fits in very much with what David said about seeing. There is also an element of Purim here too. The enemy was routed out against great odds by the people uniting as one body, mind, and spirit. Unity is the key to every victory with God's help. Everything you point out, Brenda, is so correct. As soon as the name Nachash comes, it's like, okay, it's got to be connected to the Nachash. But I think you're right. Shaul's first battle, Adam's first battle, very, very much, very, very much. Do you want to add anything?
Yes, Rabbi. It ties into Braca's question because I hearted her comment in the chat, but I've always felt the same way. And so your answer is so appreciated. But you have to refresh my memory, perhaps. But there was one time that I was so troubled by the fact that Jacob had 137 years, if I remember correctly, but by his own admission, only 17 Tov good years. And
No,
that,
wait. He was 100, he died at 147.
okay.
And the
But
key was when he was 130.
very good. And then tell that pit about, because it's also really close to Purim. So we've been talking about and thinking about the hidden activity of Hashem. But you gave me a great piece. Thank you for the correction about Jacob, because there was a fixing, a tikkun that was happening concerning Adam. And sometimes in
Right.
life, we can't figure out, yes, we need to do teshuva if we can see what we've done wrong, and do it not only for our sake, but those people that are involved in the fixing. But sometimes there's just stuff going on that you wonder, what in the world? And I think that's a perfect example. And maybe that would help Raka, but that business of God is always working, even maybe especially when we can't see or sense it.
Okay, thank you, Brenda. What Brenda's referring to here is that when Yosef brings Yaakov for the first time to meet Paro, and Paro says, how old are you? And he answers, like, the years of my life are 130 years. That's how old he was at that point. And they've been not good. They have not been good. Now, this is connected to the last 17 years of his life. 17, of course, is Gematria Tov. And so the last 17 years were the best years of his life, paradoxically, in exile, but he's with his family. So the question is, why did he say the 130 years? So without going into it too much, this number 130 is very, very significant, because we're told that after Cain killed Abel, so it says that Adam separated from Chava for 130 years. But during those 130 years, he spilled seed. And from that seed comes certain souls and spirits who went through many, many different transitions until they were finally reincarnated into the Jewish souls in Egypt. And so it's all very Kabbalistic when he says, my years have been 130 and they've been evil, because we're told that the face of Yaakov was like the face of Adam, that he had this connection to Adam, but he also had the connection of these 130 years. That was and the tikkun of all of Israel. Again, for those who have Orchard of Delights, this is written up about these 130 years. Okay, Dara points out the part where the people object to Yonatan being killed or punished is included in the V'yiten Lecha prayer done on Motzi Shabbos. So Dara is pointing out that Motzi Shabbos, there's all these songs that people sing, recite, and she's just pointing out that this idea how the people came to defend Yonatan is included in this prayer called V'yiten Lecha, and he will give to you. V'yiten Lecha. So Dara, thank you for pointing that out. That whole story, I have to say, is not easy to understand, nor was the story of Yiftach with the vow he made. But at the end, it was very significant that the people stood up and saved Yonatan. Okay, David says, I once heard a teaching that the two pillars represent every man on one side Yoked to the Mashiach on the other.
Yo.
David, what do you mean yoked?
Yoked,
Oh, yoked.
like two heads connected in a yoke.
Okay, the two pillars represent every man on one side, yoked to the Mashiach on the other. Together they support the roof of the temple. Yachin is a name that occurs a fair number of times, but never for someone who rises up as being extra special. He is every man. Boaz, of course, Boaz evokes the kinsman, redeemer of the Ruth story. So I'm not really following what you're trying to say here.
So one pillar is John Doe. It's just a name that occurs quite a bit in the text, but it's just a common, it's Joe. It's Joe next door. It's not someone who does anything special, but it represents all of us because that's
Okay.
every man. That's John Doe and Jane Doe.
Okay.
That's Yakin on one side. The other side is very famous and very famous in a certain way, in being the person who is like us, who is able to save us. And together, those two are somehow supporting the house.
Wow. Very nice. Very nice. Of course, Mashiach comes from Boaz, from Ruth, Boaz and Ruth. And from Ruth comes David. From David comes the Mashiach. So I have to think about that. I never, the every man and the special man.
Yeah.
Have to think about that. Okay. Brenda includes a link to the song Kel Mistater. That was that special poem that I quoted from Yachin and Boaz. It's one of my favorite, absolutely, is Kel Mistater. Everyone is invited to listen to it. Dara says, I remember Shmuel Silver and was guest in their home. Fitting that a class dedicated to him is about Shmuel, right? Yezicho Baruch. So yes, they despite the fact of living in a very small house, they hosted a lot of people for many, many, many years. Many people were guests of Shmuel and Nechama. And so there, you're right, it's very fitting that he's remembered tonight. Actually, we're going to the cemetery tomorrow to do a remembrance there. Bracha asks, what is the connection between Nachash and Choshen? Okay, so that also I write about in Orchard of Delights. Choshen and Nachash are the same letters. So I assume that's why you're asking. They're the same letters. So the hint to here is, and it's connected to Binyamin. If you remember, when Yosef is trying to get the brothers to do tshuva, he's kind of testing them to see if they've changed their ways. And remember, he hides a cup in Binyamin's bag. And they leave, they don't realize they have this cup in their bag. And Yosef sends someone to accuse them of stealing his special cup. And they innocently say, anyone who you find the cup with, they should be your slave. And of course, they find the cup in Binyamin's bag. And so then Yosef says to them, don't you understand that I can divine, no one can divine like me, meaning no one has prophetic power like me. But the verb is lenachesh. In modern Hebrew, it means to guess, but in its fixed form, it means a prophetic sight. So Yosef says, like, you thought you were going to steal this cup and I wouldn't know? Don't you understand that I have this power of the Nachash? And so the Choshen Mishpat, this was a type of Lenachesh, a type of oracle, a type of prophetic method that God gave the Jewish people to be able to ask certain questions and get answers in a prophetic way. I hope that answers your question. And also 130 equals kol. It's kol without a vav. That's true. Kuf lamed. Maybe after the fruit, he needed to find his own voice. I don't know what that means. What do you mean, Bracha? If you're still there.
After the sin of eating the fruit from the tree, which he
he needed to find his own voice. That's a nice drasha. Really, that's a very, very nice drasha. It took him 130 years, but then he got together with Chav again and they had Shet. And so there was a tikkun there. There was a tikkun. So that very, very good. And Dara points out, any thoughts on why that section regarding Yonatan was included in Vayiten Lecha? Maybe just because it's a great merit to Israel that they spoke up. They could have been more passive and let Shaul do whatever he wanted to do, but they, in a certain way, they felt it was wrong, and so they stood up. And so maybe that's just a hint for how we should start the week, by standing up for what we think is right and correct. I just made that up. I hope that's a good answer. I hope that's a good answer. But it makes sense to me. You know, Reb Shlomo used to say all the time, he would come up with these like really deep ideas, and he said, I don't know if it's true, but it sounds good. So Dara, I'm not sure what I said is true, but it really sounds good.
Sounds good to me too.
I want to thank you so much for that statement. And I'm going to take it as a blessing, because tomorrow we're going down to our Social Security office to protest. And hopefully with your blessing, that, can you give us a blessing that we'll be successful? Are you able to do that?
I can't really do that because I don't know what you're protesting. I don't know what the issue is.
Oh, they're going to cut Social Security and Medicare. That's what's on their plate, and we are protesting for all of the people who, I mean, there's millions and millions of people are in our age group.
I understand.
What do you mean?
One of them.
What do you mean by cut it? Like, are they really cutting it, or are they trying to make it more?
Yes, that's what their goal is. You need to monitor this, and if you have a chance to have a voice, because
Amy,
your life is on the line.
I just disagree with, I don't think there's any evidence that that's what anyone is trying to do.
Right.
Okay.
Amy, that's why I hesitated.
They're not cutting the benefits. They're cutting out, supposedly there are people receiving it that are not eligible, and they're
right.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
That's
there's an
1%
issue of fraud accounts.
That's about right, Robert. You're on the nail there, Robert.
Okay, Amy,
100%.
Okay, I'm sorry I brought up. I'm sorry. I don't want to.
No, it's okay.
I just need to make one very brief statement about it. It will only take one sentence.
Okay.
there is a lot of window dressing put on edicts that have been coming out. They need a lot of fine tuning and understanding. And I want to give Amy a blessing just from me personally to give her strength to be in the right place at the right time. And it's
Okay, that's good.
really a good role model for putting your teaching into action about, finding something that's important to do and trying to do it.
And
That's a
especially
very good
helps-
blessing, Bracha.
thank you, Bracha. It's especially if it helps a lot of people, not just yourself, to have.
Amy, what I want to say
Million.
is that first of all, again, I'm a bit wary of saying this, actually, because we're getting towards the end of our session. But everyone's known for at least 20, 25 years that unless there was some kind of fixing, Social Security would not be able to give full benefits the way it was set up. Everyone's known this for 25 years. Everyone's known this. And it also happens that America is approximately $35 trillion in debt. And so, yes, there is a lot of disagreement right now with what would any government is supposed to do with the fact that every day the national debt is growing proportionally. And like I said, everyone's known for a generation that if certain things weren't changed, the way that Social Security, that there's just not enough money coming in that could pay full benefits. So some kind of tikkun has to happen. I'm not saying that what is or isn't being proposed is right or wrong. I'm just saying that America is facing some real, just like Israel has some real challenges. So does America, and the balloon is going to burst at some point, and it won't be pretty if it does. So someone's got to do something to get a handle on the national debt. And of course, that affect, I receive Social Security. So I'm an interested party here. All I'm pointing out is no one wants it to be cut. No one, so many people live on their Social Security.
The added or particular problem with Social Security, though, different from some of the others, is that Congress got a bright idea many years ago and figured out that, hey, we can borrow money from Social Security instead of borrowing it from and paying interest on it. And they kept borrowing. And when the question comes up, when do you start paying back what you borrowed? The answer is, see you Saturday.
You're right. Okay, so I don't want to get too much into politics.
Yes.
Bracha, I think your bracha to Amy was very good. We all should be in the right place at the right time.
Doing the right acts.
Doing the right actions and everything. And I'm going to end with a blessing for America. America is a wonderful country. A wonderful country. I haven't really lived there for 50 years, except for 7 years in the middle in Denver. So I have very, very good, warm feelings America, but America has a lot of problems, a lot of very, very serious problems. So I want to give America a blessing that it can find the right way to solve its problems without bloodshed, without violence, with some kind of maturity, and find a way forward to really be a beacon of light and democracy and good morals and ethics. But there's a lot of tikkunim that are needed. Just like Israel needs a lot of tikkunim, America needs a lot of fixing in many, many different ways, not just the economy. A lot of moral, ethical issues have gotten very much out of hand in America, and I bless America to find the right solutions.
Thank you.
Anyways, I will be there in a
Amen,
couple of
Andrew.
weeks.
I'm so glad. Welcome home.
We'll be there. Actually, for 6 weeks, we're going to be in the States for 6 weeks.
Whoa.
Where will
Yeah,
you
my
be besides
favorite.
Pearlstone?
After Pearlstone, we're going to Florida, and then we're going to Denver, and then we're going to Hawaii.
I assume you're flying to Florida.
Yes, we're flying to Florida.
To
We have family in Florida.
to-
Our trip is a good part work and some vacation in the middle somehow.
now,
We actually have teaching in Hawaii. We have a number of very nice events set up, and yeah, I was going to let everyone know soon, and I'll let everyone know how we'll deal with the classes and everything. Anyways, everyone,
but
thank
wait,
you for
one
coming.
second, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I must ask you, if you're in Hawaii, I know there's not a lot of rabbis in Hawaii. But the rabbi that I mentioned on Mashiach Alley, do you remember me mentioning that there was a
Yes.
rabbi who is 11th generation Baal Shem Tov, and he conceived a child on Mashiach Alley?
Right. He's in Hawaii.
He's a rabbi in Hawaii.
Which island?
That I have no idea. I would
Okay.
imagine the main one, but his first name was Mendy, Mendy, Mendy.
Well, that's Chabad.
Right, that's unusual.
Yeah, rabbi. But
Well, that's who we're working with. We're working with Chabad in Kauai and the Big Island.
I think his last name was Kraus, or it began with a K, if I'm saying it wrong.
Okay, I'm going to keep that in mind, and we might cross paths.
If you do, you'll be lucky. I want to know what happened to that kid.
Okay. I will try to remember. I will.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you. Enjoy the rest of Shushan Purim. And we're on for Tuesday. And let me just, I have to save the chats.
And we won't have class for 6 weeks?
I'm still working it out. A good amount of the classes we will not be having. We will not be having.
Right.
I'm probably going to pre-record the Haftorahs and maybe some of Shmuel Aleph. I have to see. But we will be sending. I'm going to do the Haftorahs. Will be posted every week. Numerical gems will be posted every week. The weekly mass email with all the parsha and everything will be posted every week. But live classes probably will not happen. So,
Happy trails.
Thank you.
Happy trails to you.
Okay, we'll talk more about it in upcoming classes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Everyone be well.
Be well.
Good, Rabbi. Thank you.